Once upon a time, there was a little mouse named Norman who lived with his mother and father in an old icebox down in the cellar of a big brown house. Now, there was one very strange thing about little Norman Mouse and his mother and father, and that was they all had colored tails, which they could take off and hang up at night when they went to bed. Little Norman's tail was bright red, his mother's tail was blue, and his father's tail was cucumber green. Well, one Saturday, little Norman Mouse had just finished his lunch when suddenly he heard music. It seemed to be coming from up in the street. Little Norman scampered out of the icebox, climbed the cellar wall, and crawled outdoors through the cellar window. Well, sir, there was a real live circus parade with a big brass band, clowns, lions and tigers, and 6 big elephants. Little Norman was so excited his eyes fairly popped. And while he was watching, a man wearing a tall silk hat climbed down from one of the red and gold circus wagons and went right down the stairs into little Norman's cellar, with little Norman following right behind. Well, the man knocked on the icebox door. And when little Norman's father opened the icebox door, the man tipped his tall silk hat very politely and said that he was the manager of the circus and had heard so much about the 3 mice with the colored tails that he had come to see if he could hire them to go with his circus. Norman's father was so pleased he wiggled his cucumber green tail. Norman's mother wiggled her blue tail, and little Norman wiggled his bright red tail. "That's wonderful," said the circus manager. "I'll pay $3 a week for 3 mice with colored tails to march at the head of my circus parade. You'll be right behind the brass band and right in front of the 6 big elephants." Well, sir, little Norman was shaking with excitement. But the next minute, his happiness was dashed to pieces when his father said to the circus manager, "I'm very sorry, but we won't be able to go with your circus because little Norman still has 2 weeks of school before summer vacation, and we don't want to take him out." But the manager said, "Oh, don't worry about that. I'll go away with the circus, but 2 weeks from Monday I'll come back. And then, all together, you can march away right at the head of the circus parade." Well, you can imagine how excited little Norman was. And when he went to school, you can imagine how excited the other little mice were when Norman promised that when the circus came back to town, he would ask the manager to let them ride on the elephants' backs. But poor little Norman, he was so crazy with joy he hardly knew what he was doing, because when he got home from school that day, what do you think had happened? He'd forgotten to wear his rubbers home. He'd lost his book somewhere on the way. And worst of all, his bright red tail was missing. Poor little Norman. When he came home without his bright red tail, his mother said, "Now we can't go with the circus." So Norman's father called the manager on the telephone and told him what had happened. And the manager said, "Oh, don't worry about that, because instead of paying $3 a week for 3 mice with colored tails to march at the head of the parade, I'll pay $2 a week for 2 mice with colored tails to march in the middle of the parade, and I'll be back," he said, 2 weeks from Monday. And when little Norman's father hung up the telephone, he said to Norman, See what you've done? Now we'll have to leave you behind with your grandmother." But Norman said, "Well, if I can't go with the circus because I have no tail, I won't be able to go to school either." But his mother said, "Oh, yes, you will, because you can wear my blue tail, and I'll stay home in the icebox until your father and I go away with the circus." So little Norman wore his mother's blue tail to school, and the other little mice thought it was even prettier than Norman's bright red one. And after school, one of them asked if he could wear the blue tail part of the way home. And, of course, Norman said yes. So he took off his mother's blue tail absent-mindedly and held it out for the other little mouse to take. But they were just passing over a big bridge, and Norman thought the other mouse had hold of the tail when he really hadn't. And when Norman let go, his mother's blue tail fell down into the water and sank out of sight. Well, sir, when Norman got home, his mother said, "Now, surely we can't go with the circus." And his father called up the manager again on the telephone, and the manager said, "Well, we'll just have to make the best of things. So instead of paying $2 a week for 2 mice with colored tails to march in the middle of the parade, I'll pay $1 a week for 1 mouse with a cucumber green tail to march at the end of the parade. Well, Norman's father hung up the phone and said to Norman, "Now I'll have to let you wear my cucumber green tail to school until it's time for me to go with the circus." Well, the next day, Norman wore the cucumber green tail to school, and on his way home, as he passed over the big bridge, he looked down into the water, hoping he might see some sign of that blue tail. And as he leaned over the railing, he heard a coarse, rasping voice, and turning around, he saw an ugly lady mouse with large black-rimmed spectacles glaring at him. She said, "Why are you wasting your time dawdling there when you ought to be in school?" Norman told her school was over for the day and that he was looking for his mother's blue tail, which he had lost by accident. "Accident," she said. "It was your fault. I can tell a stupid mouse when I see one." Norman said, "Oh, no, it was an accident, and I'll show you how it happened." And he took off his father's cucumber green tail and said, "I passed the tail like this," and thought my friend had hold of it, but he didn't. And then, when I let go the tail dropped like this. And as he said that, Norman let go of his father's cucumber green tail, and it fell down into the water and sank out of sight. And the ugly lady mouse laughed. "Ha, ha, ha! Now, you stupid little thing, you've lost that tail, too." When little Norman got home and told his mother and father that he'd lost the last colored tail, they felt so bad they sat down and burst into tears. And you never heard anyone cry so pitifully in all your life. They cried and cried for 2 whole weeks. And when they finally stopped, Norman's father said, "Now it's only one day. Tomorrow the circus will come and go away without me." And he and Norman's mother started crying harder than ever. And poor little Norman felt so guilty as he lay alone in his little bed on the top shelf of the icebox, listening to his mother and father crying down below, that then and there he made a solemn vow that never again would he ever lose another single thing. Positively. Well, sir, there must be some good fairy mouse who rewards any little mouse who decides to turn over a new leaf and do the right thing. Because no sooner had little Norman made his resolve than he heard a wonderfully soft, sweet, soothing voice coming out of the darkness of the icebox. The voice said, "Don't worry, little Norman, because I'm going to tell you how you can make 3 colored tails so that you and your mother and father can all go away with the circus in the morning. Upstairs in this big brown house, there's a lot of string in the kitchen drawer. Make 3 tails out of that string, and then color them bright red and blue and cucumber green by dipping them in the watercolors you will find in the children's playroom. And that's all there is to it." Well, in no time at all, little Norman was out of the icebox and upstairs in the big brown house. Quickly, he got the string out of the kitchen drawer, took it to the children's playroom, and he made 3 nice tails out of it. But before coloring them, he decided to see how they fitted. So he tied on one of the tails and stood up in front of the looking glass. Well, what he saw in the looking glass nearly scared the wits out of him, because right behind him was a big black cat. And just as Norman saw the cat jumped. But quick as the cat was, little Norman was quicker. He jumped out of the way and scooted inside a little electric locomotive that was standing there on a set of tracks, and the cat couldn't reach him. Norman's little heart was pounding away with fear. That is, until he heard that same soft voice that had talked to him before. And now the voice whispered to Norman, "Don't be afraid of the cat, little Norman. Just start up the electric locomotive and let your string tail drag along the tracks behind, because no cat can resist chasing a piece of string. He'll forget all about you." And little Norman laughed right out loud. "Don't laugh," growled the big black cat. "I'll get you yet." "Oh, no, you won't," said little Norman. And he gave a couple of toots on the locomotive whistle, and he rang the bell, and away went the little toy locomotive with the string dragging along the track behind. And sure enough, it hadn't gone halfway around the track when, just as the good fairy had said, That moving string was too much for the cat to resist. As the cat leaped after the string, little Norman put the locomotive into full speed ahead, and the race was on. Round and round the little toy locomotive kept going all night long, but the cat kept going too, and little Norman began to worry because it was getting daylight now, and as he looked at the playroom clock, he saw that he only had a half hour before the circus parade would come, and if he wasn't down in the cellar with the three colored tails when the circus came, it would go away without him and his father and mother. But just when little Norman thought the cat was never going to tire out, the cat suddenly stopped still. A wild, glassy look came into its eyes, its legs wobbled, and it slumped to the floor exhausted and fell sound asleep. Little Norman yelled, "Hooray!" He grabbed the three-string tails and started for the watercolor paints to color them bright red and blue and cucumber green. But just then, he heard music in the distance. The circus was coming. He wondered would he ever be able to color the tails in time. Down in the cellar in the old icebox, Norman's mother and father heard the music too, and they cried louder and louder as it came nearer and nearer. And a minute later, there was a knock at the icebox door. Norman's father opened it, and there stood the circus manager. Norman's father wiped his eyes and told the manager that now they had no colored tails at all because they'd lost the cucumber green one. And then he started to cry again, and so did Norman's mother. And, of course, this made the manager feel bad, and he started crying, too. But he didn't cry long, because the parade was already late, and he had to go. And as soon as they heard him up in the street, blowing his whistle for the band to start, little Norman's father and mother knew their last chance of going with the circus was gone. They were just about to burst into tears again when the icebox door flew open, and who walked in but little Norman, carrying three beautiful colored tails over his arm. "Quick," he cried, "put on these colored tails. We haven't a minute to lose." And dragging his father and mother up to the street, he got there just as the parade was starting to move away. "Stop!" little Norman shouted at the top of his lungs, and the parade did stop. Because it looked so ridiculous to see a little mouse with a bright red tail commanding a big parade to stop. And when the manager stuck his head with the tall silk hat out of his red and gold wagon to see what had happened, he recognized the three mice with the colored tails right away, and was he tickled to death. "This way," he said, and he led them right to the head of the parade, behind the brass band, and in front of the 6 big elephants. "Get ready," he said to the band leader. Then the circus manager lined them up. On one end was Norman's mother with the blue tail. On the other end was Norman's father with the cucumber green tail. And right in the middle was little Norman with his bright red tail. That was the signal, and away with the circus marched the 3 mice with the colored tails.